This is Tammy Ramsay, and in honor of National Adoption Month, I thought I would share this conversation. So as I reflect on the past year, I see that there's been a lot of discussion about race in America as we see this resurgence of white nationalism and these white supremacy rallies and stuff throughout the country. It's very disturbing. And it's got me thinking a lot about my time working in the private adoption field. I believe that the baby business in America reflects how our country values human beings based on race. There is a supply and demand. At the top of the totem pole are the Caucasian babies. There's a huge waiting list of families desperately waiting to adopt them. At the bottom of the totem pole are the African American babies, and there's a tiny fraction of the amount of families open to adopting them. So very often in my job, I would have to turn African American expectant mothers away. It was so painful, it was horrible, it was really one of the hardest parts of that job. At first I remember thinking, well, maybe it's just that there are more Caucasians looking to adopt and they want to match their kids. But then I started looking at the reports and I saw that Asians are in high demand just under Caucasians. So Caucasian families are actively looking to adopt Asian babies. So that whole thing about wanting to match your child and not wanting to have to deal with the questions, it just doesn't jive. There's something on a much deeper level here. There are a lot of incentives put into place to try to fix this situation, one of them being the fact that black babies are less expensive than white babies. These incentives sometimes led to families being unprepared, where they would just say yes because maybe they couldn't afford a Caucasian baby, but they never really thought about the complexities that go into transracial adoption. So my intention and my hope for this conversation is that we'll learn more about ways that we can improve the transracial adoption experience for the child so that they are in an environment that is going to best suit their development and their healthy racial identity. Over the years, I did see an improvement. So compared to a decade ago, there are more families opening up to adopt transracially. However, there is still a huge problem, a huge disparity. And for the families that are opening up, there's more work that we can do to help prepare them. We're going to start the conversation off by talking with somebody I really admire. Her name is Bryan Jordan, and she's a social worker with an extensive background on the impact of culture on the family. Described as the mom in the know, Bryan is an international expert on babies and families and is in very high demand. Just last week, Emmy-nominated actress Julia Stiles raved about Bryan publicly as someone she's learned so much from about childcare. On this call, Bryan discusses the importance of not glossing over the complexities of adopting a child of color. Then we're going to talk to a friend of mine named Jay Jensen, who is going to share his own personal adoption story and tell us about a big surprise in his life that he credits for making him a better human being. We're going to end the call with words of wisdom from clinical psychologist Dr. Shefali, who sheds light on how to improve the transracial adoption experience for the child, and she challenges us as parents to take a deep, honest look at our own biases, our fears, and our insecurities so that we project less of that onto our children. Bryan has a bachelor's degree in child development and a master's in social work from USC, where she's also an adjunct professor. Bryan opened the Cradle Company, which is a pregnancy resource center in Los Angeles, back in 2009. She later went on to found the National Association of Birth Workers of Color. Hi, Bryan.
Hi, Tammy.
Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy life to talk to me today. You're in France right now, right?
I am. I'm in Nice.
Okay, and what are you doing over there?
I actually had a postpartum client. You know that I do a lot with babies and birth and basically all things family. So I actually had a client who had a baby and had to be in Nice. So my work brought me here.
Not a bad gig.
No, not at all. I can't complain about that, that's for sure.
Well, good. Well, you and I met at a Dr. Shefali event in LA, and then we became Facebook friends. And I was actually inspired to have this conversation because of you. There was some post about transracial adoption, and after working in the adoption field for almost 10 years, I messaged you privately about some racial issues and things that I saw, and you questioned me, like, why are you messaging me privately? Like, we already know this. Other people need to hear this. Like, you need to talk about this publicly. And it made me think, like, all the times that I don't say things because it's uncomfortable or it's painful. So you did really inspire me to have an open conversation about transracial adoption. And the fact,
Oh.
so I thought it would be great to have your feedback on how we can improve transracial adoption.
I mean, there's so much to say here. I would just say that one, I think, however people come together to make a family is a beautiful thing. And so I know that people have their opinions about transracial adoption being something that is a negative or a positive. I don't look at it this way because I think whether it's in your own personal family or you've gotten your family through adoption, that we all have ways in which we have to grow and our parenting skills and our ability to deal with race, etc. It can sometimes be harder to make it work if you haven't done the work, as an adult, as a parent, but it's not that it's a negative. And so, I just want anyone listening to see, who may have a family that is multi-ethnic, that this is not taking to task the institution in itself, but just thinking about and being thoughtful about the ways in which we have made mistakes in the past by not having these conversations and maybe glossing over that we're just going to be a family and get together and that's all we need is love. And love is important, but it's not enough when we're talking about the esteem of young children and eventually people who are going to be adults. And so I just want to make sure that that's really clear on my position. And so when we had this conversation on Facebook, it came from, I do a lot obviously with parents. I tend to be a parent that's really looking to find more gentle ways to connect with my kids and to set limits and boundaries, which is different from my family origin. And so I happen to be in a lot of what we would call gentle parenting communities. And within these communities, there tends to be lots of different types of families and sometimes a lot of transracial adoptive parents in these groups. And what I'm always struck by as a woman of color who also has a multi-ethnic family, my husband is not a person of color, is how many times I will read from the parents that they don't see color, which for me as a person of color, as an American, as someone who has been a social worker, very troubling for me to hear that when someone is raising a child who will walk through the world where people will actually see their color and have ideas or biases about what that means. And so I think that's what prompted me to make this post on Facebook, just talking about, how do we improve that space? Because I know it's coming from a place of this idea that you're being open-minded or progressive. And I think for some white people, they think by saying that it's showing that they're not racist. But I think if you were raised in America, if you went to school in America, we have to be okay telling the truth about how we tell stories, what images we see on TV, and those images that we see, the stories that we tell, generally are going to be attached to color in the United States. And so I think that's kind of where the conversation started. I have lots of friends who have transracial adoptive homes. I have some friends who grew up in transracial adoptive homes, and I dealt with this a bit. As a social worker working with kids who deal with trauma and behavioral issues and emotional things and adoption and loss and grief, I know what it is for kids not to feel seen and heard. And so putting those things together and, my clinical background and just living in this world, it's to me a very dangerous thing for someone who's being entrusted to care for and build a Black and a brown body not to truly see who they are out of this misguided idea that this is, something that's progressive or non-racist. And so that's where it really came from.
I think that a lot of people think that, love is enough. I'm, this Caucasian family, I'm just going to love my child enough that it's all going to be fine and we're going to pretend that they're just like us in every way. And I think, what you and I have talked about in the past is that that's glossing over a lot of big issues. Like you have to raise a Black son differently than a white son. I mean, there's just, different privilege and different risks. And so I think what I hear maybe you're saying is that we can't oversimplify it and just think that, you don't have to do the work or live in a diverse community or change your circle of friends. There are actual steps you have to take to create a loving, safe, nurturing place for this child to grow and have a healthy racial identity.
It breaks my heart a little to say that you have to raise your white child differently than your Black child. it breaks my heart to say this, but I know that you would be leaving them without the armor they need to survive if they're going into the world thinking that they are going to be treated the same. And I'm not saying, there's two sides to that sword. You also don't want to create children that are hypersensitive about their color, that are thinking that they can't do certain things or that they can't be who they are because of their skin color. That's not, that is dangerous as well. So this is not what I'm advocating for. What I am advocating is for them to have an awareness that some people might have certain biases against them. And obviously, when you're giving them that information, it has to be age appropriate, depending on what age your child is. But it's also what they see around them. It's not so much what you're saying, it's what they see. And so, one rule of thumb is that you shouldn't be your child shouldn't be your only Black friend or your only Latino friend, your only Asian friend. That's a good sign that there has to be more work done with you and your community and building those social connections so that your child actually sees. If you're saying that you don't see color and that you are coming from this place of community and and breaking bread with people that look different than you, then it should be reflected in the school that your child is going to, the community that you're choosing to live in. If you're a person that goes to church or to synagogue or to mosque, what does that look like for your child? And it's thinking about those things. And sometimes these are things that you have never had to think of before if you were a white person, growing up in America. And I just want to say also that what's hard is that so many people go into it and they're so well meaning and so well intentioned, and they really do just want to love a child. And it's unfortunate because they've lived a certain life. They don't even understand or know that there's this whole other world going on for people of color in the United States.
You're right, there is this whole other world that goes on, and I think it's naive of us to expect that we understand it when we haven't gone through it. So what else can we do to bridge the gap?
If you are going to take on a Black child, you also have to adopt Black culture. If you are going to raise an Asian child, you need to also be taking in Asian culture into your home, and not in a way that we're just dressing up and treating it like a holiday, but more so like the actual culture of wherever it is that your child has come from. I think that's important to understand.
Thinking of your own family, your children being, part Caucasian, part African American, how do you talk to them about it? I know they're little, but have you had conversations directly with them about this? Like, how do you instill healthy identity in them?
I have, because my oldest is 11, even though I have little ones. I have one that's 17 months, one is 3, but my oldest is 11. So we've been able to have these conversations, but I think the conversations I've had with them is that they don't have to choose. They're not like a grapefruit that we can section off and they're 50% this and 50% that. They are all Black, they are all white, they are mixed race, so they don't actually need to define one for themselves. And that's a conversation that I've been having with my 11-year-old, is more so talking to him about how he sees himself without me defining that for him. I've been able to see through my eyes, who he gravitates towards and what he picks up. A lot of it has to do with the value and the culture that you set in the house. As the mom in my house, I set a lot of the tone of the culture of our house. So he's obviously picking up lots of African American culture. That's going to be different for different mixed race families, depending on who is setting the tone for what your culture is in that house. So a lot of our conversations have been about him not needing to define himself for others. For my little ones, it's more about exposing them to lots of different types of people that they see in their books and in the cartoons we watch. I'm very mindful of things like the kind of dolls that I buy for my kids. I don't buy white dolls for them, and it's not because I don't want white dolls in my house, but they will be inundated with images of European type features and books and TV that I don't need to add more of that for them. And so we don't tend to purchase that stuff in the house. If someone gets it for them, it's fine. But that's one of the ways that we work to combat that. The other thing that I would say for white adoptive parents is that they need to have done or be willing to do their own work. If they are coming to the space and just saying, I'm not racist, I don't need to do this work, then they're already 100 steps behind. Because, racism doesn't just look like excluding someone from your country club or using the N-word. It can also be being afraid to get into an elevator with a Black man. It can be, thinking that people who look a certain way don't have education. And it creeps up on us when we least expect it. We have biases that we learn from the media, from school, from our parents. And so you have to be willing to address those things if you're going to be taking on something that it's this monumental.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that's something that is definitely glossed over. It's hard for all of us to admit that we have biases. And this is an example. If we want to create the best environment for our kids, we have to look at ourselves, and they help us grow our kids. They really do hold the keys to unlock the deepest parts of ourselves if we allow them to.
People in the world have taught me the most is my children about myself and the things that I need to work on. And so this is not something just for white parents who are adopting, Asian, Black, or Latino kids. We all have to have a level of vulnerability and humility if we're doing it well. It takes that to be doing it well, because I don't have all the answers. No one has the answers. But, there are people that I can call to get those answers from, or to support me when I'm at a space where I'm not able to meet my kids at the level at which I'd love to meet them. We have to be willing to be able to do that for them.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much, Brandy.
Thank you. This is such an important conversation, and I'm glad that we are bringing these kind of things to light. I always say that shame, racism, classism, it all needs silence for it to thrive and fester. And so by having these conversations, I think that we just get closer to actually having this space where we can transcend race, and our kids can just show up and be who they are without having to do all this yucky stuff. And so I'm thankful for you for having this conversation. Bye, Tammy.
Bye. Next, we're going to hear a personal adoption story from Jay Jensen, who is not only an adoptive father, but an adoptee himself. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Tammy.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Just to give people a little background, you and I and our families were part of a adoption support group together. And so I have been able over the years to see you and your son interact together. And there's been so many times where I walked away from an experience with you guys thinking like, I want to be a parent like Jay. Like, he's so present with Jake. He's so in tune. They are such good buddies. They love each other so much. I thought it would be a good time just to talk to you and have others hear your story and how adoption has changed your life.
So our adoption started like most people's. My wife and I, we were having some fertility issues, and so we decided to go down the road of adoption. The unique part of our story is that we are both adopted, so that was always going to be part of our plan. So we went through the process. We filled out all the paperwork. We checked the Caucasian box, and then we got the phone call that we were selected. We met the birth mother and spent time with her, and we were in the delivery room. And so we were there when Jacob came out, and shortly thereafter, we learned that Jacob was indeed biracial. So that was a bit of a surprise, but I'll tell you, I wouldn't change a thing.
When you say that you checked the Caucasian box, do you think that you did that because you wanted him to match you? You wanted things to be easier on him? Like, now looking back on that, do you think about the reason?
Yeah, it definitely was coming from a place of continuity. We wanted it to be easier for him. It'd be easier if he matched his parents, therefore he wouldn't have, all these questions to answer. But as I said, I wouldn't change it. It's made me a better person. It's been a great blessing that he came out biracial.
That means there was another birth father involved. Did that put you at a legal risk? Because here you have this baby at home, and then you get the call that, guess what, there's this other birth father. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it did. We had already received the form back from the original birth father, the relinquishing of his rights. So when we found out that there was another birth father, we had to locate him, and we were uncertain. Maybe he wanted to keep this child. So we were a bit nervous about that, and it took about a year of being on pins and needles, trying to find this young man. And, we were in court 3 different times during that period of time in hopes that the judge was just going to grant us custody, because we didn't have a lot of information on the birth father. So, to the judge's credit, he said, no, you're going to go find this young man because he has rights. And it was an interesting place for me to be, because I really wanted him to, hit his gavel saying, you are now the parents. But on the other hand, I was very happy that he was so hell bent on finding this birth father to give him input with this child. So fortunately, the year passed, and we received the paperwork from the young man. We found him, and it was all good, but it took a little extra time.
This is a painful thing for any birth parent to have to go through. So I'm glad that you were able to have empathy for the birth father during that time and know that he does have rights and his say is important. And as scary as it is, and you could have lost your child through it, but you were able to look at him as a human being too. And I think that says a lot about you. During that time, how did you deal with your fear?
I guess I compartmentalized it. I mean, there was no concern about bonding or anything like that. I mean, frankly, when Jake was home with us, we were invested right away. And in terms of the year that we waited, I don't really recall any real significant upset. I mean, we were just being his parents. We were raising a brand new baby boy as best we could. And, we were cautiously optimistic, but there was definitely concern.
So I know that you have kind of a semi-open adoption where you send pictures and videos to the birth mother. The birth father hasn't requested any contact. But how would you feel if Jake asked you to make contact in person with either birth parent?
I would be totally fine with it. In fact, it's Jake is the one who has given me confidence to be okay with it. I think he was about 9 years old or so when his birth mom was in town. And I have a continuing relationship with Jake's birth mom. We text every once in a while. She'll send me a message through Facebook, and, I'll randomly shoot her, maybe an 8th grade graduation picture or something like that. So we are in touch. And there was one time where she was in town and I had called Jake's mom and I said, hey, Annie's in town. What do you think about getting together? Now, she lives out of state, so these opportunities are few and far between. So I talked to Jake's mom, and so we're like, well, let's go to the source, and we asked Jake, how do you feel about meeting your birth mom? And he thought about it for a moment, and he's like, no, I don't think I'm ready. Both his mom and I are like, oh, well, the answer was there the whole time. So we did not take that opportunity to get together. But the one thing that it told me was when he comes to me with that request, he'll be ready. So yeah, I mean, I would support that fully, and like you had mentioned, I have contact with his birth mother, so that'd be very easy. But his birth father, on the other hand, there's very limited information, but I'd be more than happy to help him locate his birth father for that meeting. So I'm super open to it. And I think in large part because I'm confident with my relationship with my son. And I know, being adopted myself, and know the feeling of the relationship with my adopted parents, like they are my parents. So for me with Jake, there's no fear for me that Jake is seeking out another father or another mother. It's that curiosity that all adopted children have. What's the story? A little background would be nice to know. So I would have no hesitation at all in doing that. And in fact, I look forward to doing it, whenever that time comes.
That's great to hear, because I think adoption does trigger more fear and insecurities in us than a biological situation, because there is this whole other family, birth family, and it can be threatening if we haven't done our own work to feel secure in who we are as parents and the relationship that we built with our children. So it's nice that you have created a loving, safe place where he knows that it's okay. Because I remember you telling me you were curious to seek out your birth mother, but you waited until your mother passed because you felt a loyalty to her and you felt that would hurt her feelings.
Yeah, exactly. I saw the fear in her eyes when my mom and dad sat me down to tell me, hey, we have limited information and it's yours. It's in this folder. And I saw the fear in my mom and I thought, I don't need this. I'm interested, I want to know what's in the folder, but I don't need it. And clearly my mom has some sort of discomfort with it. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to dismiss it for now. And I made that pact with myself at that time. I'm not going to seek out my birth parents until my mom passes. I eventually found my birth mother and had that experience. But yeah, and you know, it's funny, a quick little story here too. I remember thinking, God, that's weird that my mom feels that way, you know, that she thinks that I'm actually going to go seek out another mother. And I remember as an 18-year-old going, wow, I think that's weird. Well, fast forward, we just adopted Jake, and I had a coworker who's a very good friend of mine and heavily in Jake's life ask me that question early on. So what do you think about if Jake wants to seek out his birth father? And I honestly had this immediate insecure reaction, just like I'm sure my mom was feeling. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, why do I have this reaction? This is how my mom felt. And then it took me about 15, 20 minutes to remove that feeling that I had and remembering, no, it's about my relationship with Jake. And as long as I am confident with that relationship, then locating birth parents it's a nothing burger, if you will. I do go through very similar feelings that adopting parents go through. And I always find it unique being that I'm adopted, and you would think that I would have a little bit more understanding of certain things.
But it shows the humanity in all of us and all of our unmet needs and wanting validation and people not to leave us. And the irony of it is we think if we try to resist that or not allow them contact with their birth parents, that somehow that'll make us closer. But it's the opposite. With my own adoption, I've definitely felt insecure at times, but the times where I can make a decision looking at only her best interest and being open with birth parents, then she's closer to us. She feels that. She appreciates it on a deep level, and I feel a lot closer to her. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it really, the more open we are, I think it only builds trust and strengthens the foundation with our kids.
Right. And I was going to say the same thing. I think trust is the key there. And, you know, the more trust you have in a relationship, the stronger that relationship is going to be. So, yeah, I completely agree.
And I say be open with the birth parents, understanding that that's not always a possibility in every situation. For example, in international adoption, it's very common where there's absolutely no information on any birth family. And there might be situations where it's not healthy. So, you know, you have to have boundaries and make sure it is healthy, but there is a lot of value there if it's the appropriate situation. So Jay, tell us, in what ways do you encourage a healthy racial identity in Jake?
You know, I do my best as a parent to do that, but I tell you, our community has been the most vital part of doing just that for him. You know, he had a science teacher who is biracial, and he had a football coach for a couple of years that he grew up in South Central and is a prominent performer. His best friend's father is a decorated LA County sheriff. These are all African-American individuals. And, you know, it's been great because he's been exposed to successful individuals that look just like him. And I grew up in a community that was heavily Caucasian, and there was only a couple African-American kids in my class. And I think, you know, if Jake would have been raised in that environment, his experiences would be very, very different. I've learned through this process how important the community is in helping adopting families with biracial children and how it helps with the identity question. So yeah, I feel very thankful to have this community, you know, helping out. It's great. That's saying, you know, it takes a village. I'm here to tell you, it certainly does.
So tell us about the relationship you have with Jake's mom, Kim.
Well, I got to say, I'm very proud of our relationship. You know, we learned that we didn't work very well as a married couple. So we went through the process of divorce, and that certainly creates challenges. But it's our obligation to our son to be good people and to treat each other with respect and be there for him. And even more importantly, have him see that we are united. We try to go out to dinner or out to breakfast once or twice a month, just the three of us, because the one constant, whether we're divorced or not, is that we are a family, and nobody is taking that from us. And it doesn't matter if I get remarried. Kim has since remarried, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that three of us, we are a family, and it's our responsibility. With Jake's sporting events, we go together and we sit next to each other. And it's important for Jake to look up in the stands and see both his mom and dad there. So it is important to us that we exhibit that for Jake. And I think it's really been a great benefit for all of us. So the relationship between his mom and I, it's really, really good.
I really admire the way both of you have handled your divorce. You and I have talked a lot about gender roles and how boys get shamed out of their feelings and emotions. And you're kind of unique because you're a guy's guy, you love football. Are you the coach of your
I was.
You're all into sports, you're a guy's guy, but yet you have this tender heart. Why were you not shamed out of your emotions? What was it that allowed you to preserve that and instill that in your son?
I don't know why that is part of my makeup. Maybe look back and evaluate how both my parents were, and did I pick it up from them? And they were always open with me. But I don't know why that's such a focal point of my life now. But it is, I think that society has created the male gender as somebody that can't have emotions and feelings, that we're supposed to be primal and we're supposed to suppress how we feel. And I think, frankly, it's terribly unhealthy for any human being to suppress their feelings. So it is important for me that I try to parent Jake to the place of, look, you have feelings, talk about them, express them. If it's something you don't want to talk to me about, then go talk to your mom about, or go talk to your best friend about. But don't suppress your feelings. Human beings need to emote. And I think men, more than ever, need to emote to get some of this pain and this level of upset that sometimes we keep in. We need to get it out so we could be cleaner, so we can be better. Whether you're emotional or not does not dictate who you are as a person. It dictates more of your health, your emotional health. I think it's terribly important for men to cry and be vulnerable. I think it's healthy.
I love that about you. And it's so true. I volunteer at my kids' elementary school. And so I witnessed in kindergarten a little boy give a love letter to a little girl, and another boy intercepted it, read it in front of the whole class. He was completely shamed by all the boys. He put his head down. He had tears in his eyes. It was heartbreaking to see right before my eyes. I'm like, oh, this is how it happens. This is how boys get shamed out of their feelings. And I got to see that little boys do have those feelings. They start out that way. He was so expressive and loving and sweet. And yet I saw how society just squashed that. And that was like the beginnings of this trajectory of men getting shamed out of their feelings. You are an example of a guy that can still be a guy's guy and still cry and have deep conversations with your son and allow your son to be in touch with his own feelings. I think that men think women won't think they're attractive if they show too much emotion, but I think, we find it very attractive when a man is comfortable in his own skin with his own feelings and his own emotions, and that's confidence. Really the opposite, stuffing it and hiding it and putting this hard exterior is really just insecurity. So that's actually not attractive.
Yeah, and I can see that. I can certainly understand that. And the change with this starts with our youth, with children, and how we start them out. And it's important for me to have Jake understand that it is okay. And whenever I get the opportunity with other young men, I try my best to instill that as well, that it's more of a sign of strength than it is a weakness.
What would you say to someone considering adopting transracially?
I would say be prepared to do extra work. I think if you're going to go down that road, you have to be so much more committed to do your homework, to figure out tools to deal with what a biracial adoption is going to present. Be prepared to fail, but definitely be prepared to do the extra work, find tools that work, because there will be areas that you will not be able to help them, no matter how much you try. You will not be able to provide certain aspects to their lives that are going to be very important to them. So you have to figure out how you're going to do that. And, and I would say this to anybody, you just have to be an engaged parent. You have to be a parent that cares and that wants the best for their children. then everything else I think kind of works out. I understand those that may be against a transracial adoption. I get it. I do understand. But I think in the end, if you are a loving parent, if you are involved, if you are communicative and respectful, your goal is to create a close relationship, a loving relationship, and more importantly, a trusting relationship with your child, then you can overcome all the other stuff that comes with it, including the race component. You can overcome that if you have all that other stuff, So I'm not so sure race should be the focus as much as, be involved, be loving and caring, be somebody that guides, and just be prepared to do the work, because being a parent is hard. It is hard. And you feel like you have more failures than success. But I tell you what, the one thing I tell a lot of dads that I talk to is it doesn't matter how many times you fail and how many times you feel like you made a bad decision, as long as you keep trying. And to me, as long as a parent keeps trying, that makes them a great parent, because they're gonna succeed. So just you keep plugging away and you will be successful, but you got to do the work.
Somebody told me once, the way to cure racism is through biracial grandchildren. Would you say that's true?
I think it could be helpful. I look at the older generation in our family, my father, Kim's father, and they come from a different generation where, certain words and certain behavior was much more accepted back in their day. And I think, like in my father's case, once he was exposed and he understood that he has an African-American grandchild, no doubt about it. Yeah, he's biracial, but society's eyes, this is a young Black man. And I think once he recognized that, once he kind of layered that into his life and understanding the difficulties that his son is going to have raising his grandson, I think that made him more compassionate and more understanding. And so I think it's made him better. So yeah, I do think interracial adoption can help previous generations.
So specifically, how has transracial adoption made you a better person? Like, in what way?
It's certainly given me a much, much richer life. Had I been placed with my first request of a Caucasian baby, my life would have been very different. And, dare I say, it would have been much more vanilla than it is. Having a biracial child has opened up my mind in many different ways. I'm more empathetic. It's made me a little more understanding of the difficulties that people of color have to deal with day to day. I'm more self-aware. I'm learning what it must be like to live as a Black man, and that's something I'm really trying hard to understand with my son, because I don't have any idea what that's like or what that's going to be like, but it's definitely made me better, I think. Just a better person in general.
Well, thank you so much. I always love talking with you, and I always learn from you. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Jay.
Well, thank you again, Tammy. I really enjoyed, I really enjoyed the conversation, and this whole experience has been a good one.
It's touching that, your son is the person who led you to a richer, deeper life, and he's really changing generations. I love hearing Jay's story on how adoption transformed his life. And I feel the same way, because my husband and I took in a little girl when she was 4.5 years old. We were later able to adopt her when she was 9.5. And it was through trying to help her that we helped ourselves. So I was watching Oprah one day and saw Dr. Shafali, who is a clinical psychologist, talking about parenting issues and her books and stuff on Oprah. And so I started following her work, and our entire lives changed. The work of Dr. Shafali ended up not only helping our family, but my marriage with my husband. And initially taking in an older child comes with a lot of challenges. And I think it disconnected us on a lot of levels. And I mean, we were, quote, fine, but we really weren't fine. And so by helping her, it really unraveled and got to the root of what was going on between the two of us. And so now we have such a deeper, even more passionate connection with each other. And that's not something that we ever expected going into this. We really were just trying to help our daughter. So I didn't feel right having this conversation on transracial adoption without getting some input from her. Dr. Shefali grew up in India and later came to the United States, where she eventually received her PhD in clinical psychology from Columbia University. She went on to become a New York Times best-selling author, and the Dalai Lama even wrote the preface to one of her books. She's been interviewed by Oprah several times, and Oprah has named her as one of her top 100 super soul teachers, and even said in the 30 years that she's been doing interviews that Dr. Shefali is the best she's ever heard. She's right in the middle of a very busy travel season, and she took the time to record this for us.
Raising a child is one of the hardest things we're going to do in our lives, period, whether the child is biological or adopted. But when we have an adopted child in the mix, it becomes quite compounded and challenging, because not only is a parent just typically triggered and have their childhood issues come to the surface in a biological situation, but now in an adoptive environment, those triggers and those insecurities and those childhood issues have possibly a more complex nuance and a complex face to them when they do rise to the surface. Because of interraciality between parent and child, or cross-culturality, there are more compounded and complex issues that rise to the surface that then bring about more triggers and more instability and insecurity. The adoptive parent needs to be aware that this is a very real possibility, and they need to do a true educated and psychological and spiritual check-in to understand what their biases are, what their belief systems are, what their inherent prejudices are about their own race and about the race of the child that they're adopting. This is in addition to the normal egoic issues that come up in parenting. The adoptive parent, especially of a cross-cultural child, needs to be aware that they are not bringing the child into the family, but also that they are going into the child's culture, and they need to kind of expand the paradigm where they're not, quote unquote, doing a child a favor by immersing the child in their experience, but actually quite the contrary, that their child is doing them a favor to allow them to have a cross-cultural opportunity. And the way that the parent can truly, artfully, masterfully nuance this is by submerging themselves in that new culture and anthropologically doing a true deep dive in the child's culture so that they can immerse themselves and expand their own experience and repertoire to understand who their child is, where their child came from, and what their child's cultural challenges are. So this is the onus and the burden, really, but also the privilege of the adopted parent, that they need to go out from their little box into a new culture, educate themselves, immerse themselves, and truly understand that this is complex, triggers are going to arise, and it is their duty and obligation to dismantle these triggers on a very deep psychological, intuitive, emotional, and spiritual, cultural, racial level.
So I hope that you benefited from this conversation in some way, and I hope that this information not only helps improve the transracial adoption experience for the child, but I hope that we can all pause and reflect on what the private adoption business says about the way that we value human beings in America based on their race. I think it's time that we as a country do some deep work on ourselves to try to be more united. So hopefully having conversations like this will help get us on a path that leads us to more connection and unity, where we recognize that we're all just human beings. Thanks for listening. Bye.